Prepare yourself for the ultimate gaming experience. April 5th through the 7th, the Midwest Gaming Classic returns to the Baird Center in downtown Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Dive into a vast world spanning over 250,000 square feet, showcasing the latest modern and retro game consoles, pinball machines, arcade games, tabletop, and so much more. Meet industry professionals, join engaging live panels, and explore the expansive vendor hall, the largest of its kind. Best of all, kids 9 and under are free. Grab your tickets online at MidwestGamingClassic.com or at the Baird Center. Welcome to the next level.
Hello and welcome to the Midwest Gaming Classic podcast. I'm your host, Jason Garris, panel director of the Midwest Gaming Classic. When Eric Bischoff joined WCW in 1991 as an announcer, no one expected he would be leading the company to the top of the wrestling world a few short years later. During this time, Bischoff scored major licensing deals for WCW video games, resulting in many smash hits. Find out what it was like to make these deals, what the talent thought, and if he played them, and much more. On another note, we are working hard on finalizing the panel room schedule, and as each group confirms their slot, we add them to the schedule on the website. Currently, several are scheduled and more are on the way soon. My sincere apologies. We had some unexpected but exciting new groups reach out to us, and they require more time than anticipated to get to the show. We are working as fast as we can on announcements as things fall into place. Everything we are doing is to grow the show and make it the best it can be. That includes ensuring all the expected panels and presentation groups are happy with the schedule and have their sessions ready to go prior to us announcing, as we do not wish to confuse anyone by having to change the schedule after it is initially announced. For more information on what panels are already scheduled, head over to the Midwest Gaming Classic website. Scroll to the center of the home page and click on the Learn icon. Once there, you'll be able to check out our updated panels and presentations list for this year's show. You know what? Enough of me talking. Let's get over to the next panel starring Eric Bischoff.
Put your hands together for the architect of WCW, Mr. Eric Bischoff. All right. How you doing, Eric?
Truth be known, ended up with a hell of a case of the flu in New York City last weekend, so my ass is dragging, but I'm here and I'm happy to be here. Thank you. I don't blame you, brother.
I'm just kidding. All right, well, thanks for braving it to be here to talk with all of us here at the Midwest Gaming Classic. Of course, since this is a video game themed convention, a lot of this conversation will be centered around video games and how WCW video games, any stories that you have and you remember, and those kind of the nitty-gritty and the details. Did a little bit of a poll, but just so that Eric can get caught up here. By show of hands, how many of us are wrestling fans? All right, that's about
Damn!
Yeah. By show of hands, how many of us are video game fans? How many of us were Team WCW during the Monday Night Wars?
Oh, come on now.
It was more. It was more when I did this the first time. All right, how many of us played WCW video games? All right, all of us. Shout them out. Which one was your favorite? Which one was that?
World Tour and Revenge.
What did you think of yourself in video games? If you ever saw yourself as a character in a video game, did you think it was lifelike, or what did you think?
It was bizarre. You know, I mean, if you knew my history and how I ended up in the wrestling business, that story in itself was kind of bizarre because it was all coincidence. I was a sales manager for a food processor, had an idea one day, met a guy who was a promoter and producer of professional wrestling in Minneapolis, by the name of Baird, offered me a job. Yay, Baird! Offered me a job out of the blue, which I didn't expect. I never aspired to be in the wrestling business. Just ended up there. And that theme of kind of fish out of water was consistent for me throughout my entire career. And it really, when it really manifested itself, I think, more than any other time, was seeing myself in a video game. Seeing myself on television was cool. I kind of felt proud of myself about that. And that wasn't that bizarre to me, but seeing myself in a video game was really kind of abstract, and I think that's probably why.
So let's dive into it. Let's talk about the WCW video games. The first question I'd like to ask is everyone, especially in this room, is very aware of the Monday Night War. The ratings battles, the television battles, Monday night's destination television for professional wrestling sports entertainment. But what about in the video game realm? Was there ever any sort of competition in your mind as the boss of WCW? Were you ever thinking, another lane where I would love to beat WWF would be in video games, to make a better game, to make a better selling game? Was that ever a part of the equation?
Not really.
I feel like I'm hosting 83 weeks here.
No, you haven't yelled at me. You haven't busted my chops here hard enough quite yet. Conrad would not be proud of you.
According to Dave Meltzer, and
oh my God! All right, here we go. Here, let me see that.
Hey, there's kids here.
This says F. Dave Meltzer. You're a good man. I love you for that. I love you, brother. Now, to properly answer that question, and I'm going to try to keep my answers as concise as possible, but you have to understand the trajectory, the arc of WCW. WCW was a small company that was literally, Ted Turner bought a company out of bankruptcy called NWA, renamed it WCW, and put it on the Turner networks. And it was a small, fledgling company that didn't really have a lot of success or infrastructure or anybody really knowledgeable in licensing and merchandising. And it took a while, a long while, for WCW to get to the point where it became popular enough where companies like THQ and EA Sports and other video game companies were even interested in WCW. Most of those companies, until I took over, had no interest at all in WCW as a brand. So all we were trying to do was survive and become popular as a television property. Once that happened, and it happened very quickly, almost overnight, to be honest, if you look at things traditionally. Usually it takes a long time, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years for a brand to become viable enough that anybody would be interested in licensing that brand for a video game. WCW got hot over the course of about 24 months. And as such, all of our energies, all of our focus were on how do we make this a healthy, viable television property. Nobody was really focusing, to answer your question more succinctly, nobody was really interested in trying to figure out how do we conquer this revenue stream, in terms of licensing. So we weren't looking at it. And once we got hot overnight, literally companies started coming at us. So it happened so quickly that we didn't really have time to aspire to be competitive in any other category.
So in total, there were 10 WCW video games. One of them was created before you got to WCW in 1989. There was one created in 94, about the time when you would have been promoted to executive vice president, I guess.
THQ, I believe.
That came after. This was a game on Super Nintendo that was before the one game before THQ. Okay. It was sort of like a standalone game for Super Nintendo. It was called WCW Super Brawl Wrestling. And there was one for Game Boy as well in that time period. Then there was a 3-year gap. So exactly what you were talking about, needing to get hot, needing to get a product that was worth attracting those THQ types, there was a 3-year gap. At what point, once 1997 rolls around, now we're starting to see 1 game a year, 2 games a year, THQ gets involved. So when does those conversations start happening, and who would have approached whom?
Those conversations probably started happening around 1996. Conversations in the deal-making process usually start about a year, 18 months, sometimes 2 years before the consumer would see a product in the marketplace. So I would say 95, 96 is when those conversations started to happen. In terms of who would be having those conversations, it would have been either a woman by the name of Sharon Sedella, who at one point during that timeline was our VP of marketing, or a gentleman by the name of Mike Weber, who would have been a VP of licensing during that window. So that's when they would have occurred and who most likely would have had them.
And when would these discussions or deals would have come across your desk?
Not until it was time to write a check, generally. I wasn't a licensing person. My primary role in WCW, I oversaw the whole company, technically, but I really only got seriously involved in the deal-making process when it came to things relative to television or pay-per-view, or obviously talent issues. Beyond that, I hired and oversaw people who were much more experienced than I was when it came to licensing. And this is the category that a deal like this would fall under. It would have been considered a licensing opportunity, meaning get your company hot, get your brand hot. That's when others came to you and said, hey, we'd like to take your hot property and turn it into a video game or a shoe deal or a t-shirt deal or an action figure deal. And that's when that would have occurred, how it would have occurred.
Sort of an adjacent question here, but you mentioned licensing. Were there any licensing deals that you ever caught wind of that you were like, we just can't do this? There are some brands like Kiss that just puts their name on everything, coffins, condoms, you name it, they have it, right? Was there anything that you saw and you were like, we should not do that, or you thought it was just hilarious that a brand would want to put WCW on their ridiculous product?
I was so focused on making WCW financially successful because when I took over the company, in WCW's history, prior to me taking over, it had never been profitable. It had never made $1 profit. In fact, it had lost, typically on any given year, it probably lost an average of $5 to $10 million a year in revenue. But Ted Turner, who was a real visionary, didn't really, I'm not going to say he didn't care, but his emphasis was on how many eyeballs did it attract to the network overall. Did it build an audience? And if you read anything about Ted Turner, if you read his history, you'll find that when he launched the Turner Networks, there were like 3 things that he really, really believed in. Andy Mayberry, baseball, and professional wrestling. Regardless of how successful they were in terms of ad sales and ratings and driving profit, they attracted eyeballs, and that was his goal at that time. I lost sight of the question.
I just thought of it. WCW condoms, where the big boys play.
Oh no, I'm not. By the way, brother.
Yes.
That was the only one. It's funny that you mentioned condoms. Now, here's another thing you have to understand.
I'll show myself.
No, you're brilliant. Wrestling, even today, even in the WWE, to this day, as successful as the WWE is in terms of generating revenue or ratings, advertisers, even now, are still reluctant to spend their money in wrestling. It's not comedy, it's not sports, it's not drama, it's its own little weird box that is hard to define. And as such, advertising agencies, whose job it is to make the most for their clients' money, are reluctant to say, hey, Mr. General Motors, here's WCW over here 5 million people a week are watching it. Why don't we spend money over here? Because they're afraid that their client is going to go, what the hell? Wrestling? You mean we're those big guys in tights, half naked, or beating each other up with chairs? Nah, I don't think so. So even though it's successful as a television property, advertisers are reluctant to spend money in it. Now, you get opportunistic advertisers like condoms. They don't care. If you've got eyeballs and you've got like $12 in your pocket and you might be having sex, we're in. So, and I was kind of a hooker. I didn't care. I'll take anybody's money. My job was to make money. My job was to make WCW profitable because, as I said, nobody prior to me had ever been successful making WCW profitable, and that's all I cared about. I was a hooker. I didn't care whose money I took. I would have sex for you when it came to business. As long as you could pay the bill, I'm in. And I was like the only one, because I would bring that in. I said, no, we got to do this, Trojan rubber deal. Everybody in the company would go, what are you, nuts? We can't do that. Condoms, oh my God, we can't do that. I never understood that.
I really thought you meant hooker like Luthez hooker.
No, I mean like hooker. I mean standing on the street corner taking money for fun kind of hooker.
Oh, that's what he meant. Got it. Okay, that's what he meant. We understand now. Okay, very good, very good.
I was looking through the audience trying to find the kids and the parents whom I'm offending. If there's anybody out there who's offended, I was going to say raise your hand, but screw it. I'm talking about wrestling. Come on.
Right. There's one story, and I'm sorry I'm not doing this justice and setting this up properly, but on an episode of your podcast, 83 Weeks, which you should... how many of us listen to 83 Weeks in this way? Yeah.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
You definitely should. Very good podcast. And if you love the minutiae of pro wrestling, in particular, the WCW days, you got to listen to it. There was a story that you mentioned with EA and a check that you had in your hand. Can you tell us that story?
I choke up every time somebody brings it up. No, and I think the EA Sports deal was, was really the epitome of an example of the epitome of WCW success. Probably around '98 would be my guess. When we got so hot, and again, it was overnight. To those of us who were in the middle of doing it, it seemed literally like it happened over the course of a week. It didn't. It took a couple of years, but when you're producing television every single week, 52 weeks a year, live TV, 5 hours of live TV a week or more, you get caught up in it, and time just flies. And in '98, Mike Weber and Sharon Zanella both came to me and said, hey, EA Sports wants to do a deal with you. Now, this was early in EA Sports' trajectory as a major player in the industry. And they came to us, and we had a deal with THQ that we were pretty happy with, for the most part. Excuse me. EA Sports came along and said, we'll give you, I think the number was $8 million. Might have been 10, but I'm pretty sure it was $8 million. We'll write you a check for $8 million as an advance. Not $8 million at the end of the year if things go well. It's $8 million if you let us do business with you. That's a lot of money. And they gave me a really cool jacket too, which I still have to this day. And that's when I realized how important, number one, licensing really was, because up until that point, licensing was a very small part of the revenue stream in WCW. But once, EA stepped up and wrote a check for $8 million and a jacket, and stepped up, I realized two things, just how successful we had become, number one, and number two, how important the video game business was becoming.
Where's that jacket now?
Hanging in my closet.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Let's talk about the wrestlers themselves, because that is a significant portion of revenue, at least today. If you get in a video game, you get royalties, there's a revenue stream that you receive if you are in, say, WWE 2K19. Those superstars are compensated in some way or another. Even the legends, as they are introduced into the game, are compensated in some way or another. Do you remember at all what the arrangement would have been like for the talent appearing in the video game?
They got nothing. Zero. Hogan? Not even Hogan. What was that?
No, not even Hogan.
No, not even Hogan.
I love how that got a pop, though. It's like, not even Hogan got money, woo! Everyone's happy that
Everyone's so happy he didn't get paid. That's the difference, the kind of structural difference between WCW and WWE. WWE was pretty much based on a rev sharing model, meaning if you were a talent in WWE, you got at some point later on, you got a minimum guarantee just to show up. It was, for the most part, very minimal. Thank you so much for that, brother. And then, now, again, let me back up just a little bit. You have to keep in mind, WWF at that time, went on to become WWE, was very sophisticated. It was 30 or 40 years old. At the time I took over WCW, WWF had been around for almost 3 generations. Their business was very sophisticated. They had been having success for 20 or 30 years prior to Ted Turner, probably 20 years prior to Ted Turner even launching WCW. So they already had licensing relationships, video games, t-shirts, action figures, all kinds of stuff. WCW had nothing, right? So in order for WCW to compete with the WWF, we couldn't offer anybody a rev sharing opportunity. Vince McMahon had the opportunity, if he was going to hire you, for example.
He did. I lasted like 3 minutes. I'm not kidding. Changed my name and everything. It's terrific.
He would have said, look, come to work for me. I'll give you $1,000 a week, and or whatever the number is, and I'll give you 3%, 2%, 1%, whatever the percentage was, of any of the ancillary revenue streams that you're involved in. So if you were selling t-shirts for the WWF at $10 a piece, you're making 5% of that. And you're making 5% if you're in a video game and there's 25 wrestlers in that video game, or 10 or whatever the number is, each one of you will get a designated percentage of the revenue generated by that video game. And that would be in addition to your minimum guarantee. And that's a really, really brilliant structure, by the way, because it ensures that if the company's successful, the talent's successful. If the company's not successful, the talent is not successful, or at least as successful. We didn't have that luxury because we didn't have a mature licensing and merchandising infrastructure or business in place. So we had to compensate for that by saying, okay, Randy Savage or Hulk Hogan or anybody else, since we can't offer you a reasonable revenue share opportunity, because we didn't have any revenue outside of television or pay-per-view, since we can't share that with you, we'll make up for that with a financial guarantee. The flip side of that formula is that you don't get a percentage of whatever comes up. So the talent's paycheck was guaranteed. They were at no risk. They knew exactly how much money they were going to make every week or every month. But when success came along, they didn't have the opportunity to share it like they did in WWF. So that was the primary distinction between the two companies.
How many wrestlers would have come to you and say, actually, no, I want the percentage as opposed to the downside guarantee?
None, because it wasn't possible.
Okay, this is the only contract you can have.
Yeah, I would have said, okay, call your attorney or your agent, have them, read that contract to you, and when it gets to the part where you get to participate in revenue, pay close attention, because you don't get that opportunity.
How many video games that you know of have you been featured in?
I don't even know.
None.
I don't even know.
Has WWE reached out to you and say, hey, we'd like to put you into WWE 2K20 or 2K something as a playable character, for example? Has that conversation
No,
come up?
This is really interesting. Guys, you're asking really good questions. You're a smart son of a bitch. I like this. I love interviews when I'm being asked really intelligent questions. And not to say, what was it like when you hired Hulk Hogan?
No, but what was it like when you hired Hulk Hogan, Eric?
It was fun until he wanted to participate in the video game revenue.
And then it was over.
It was over. Yeah, God, come on. No, but I worked for WWF or WWE from, I can't remember when it was, 2002 to 2007, I guess, 5 years. It was like 4 years and 11 months longer than I thought I would last. But the WWF agreements, from what I can remember, when I signed up, for the period of time that I worked for them, they owned my name, my likeness. They could use it any way they wanted to. And as long as they paid me, based on the formula that I tried to explain earlier, and by the way, when I say tried to explain, I still get a statement every quarter from WWF, along with a check, for their use of my name and likeness in whatever properties they engage in from that period of time where I worked there. Meaning, if somebody comes along tomorrow and says, oh, we want to do a video game about Stone Cold Steve Austin and Eric Bischoff based on the No Way Out pay-per-view in Montreal, for example, WWE doesn't have to call me and ask me. They can engage in that deal because they still control my name and my likeness during that period of time. So if that game was based upon something that occurred during the time that I worked for them, they can still use me. They can still use my name and likeness. And I still get a check. It's not a big check, but I still get a check.
Would that include the network?
Yes, if it's legacy or archive footage. So if let's say they want to go back and look at the best WWE bloopers from 2003, and there's video footage of me stumbling my way to the ring or botching a move in the ring or doing something silly, they can just put it on the network. And by the way, I don't get paid for that. I receive no revenue from the network, which is an interesting kind of issue in with a lot of talent. Because, for example, when I signed with WWF, nobody, including Vince McMahon or anybody in the company, saw streaming, or as it's referred to in the industry, over-the-top networks, as even possible. So it's a new source of revenue for the WWF or WWE that didn't exist when I signed my contract, but they still have the right to use my name, image, and likeness for that particular brand without having to pay me for it.
Before I open the floor up to questions, I'm sure you have many questions for Eric Bischoff, and we will get to as many of them as possible. You had a little bit of a video game, I want to say 2013, 2014 with Bischoff Hervey Entertainment. There was some sort of either, mobile games involving...
Oh, I don't know.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, gaming is a big word, or a broad word. It covers a lot of categories. But we got involved in online gaming.
Okay.
That, here's essentially what we did. We took, for example, we created a Hulk Hogan digital slot machine. Did the same thing with David Hasselhoff. No, we did, because David Hasselhoff is huge in Germany.
Did you guys know that?
You brought down the wall!
No.
Yes, he did. Yes, he
He
did.
was on the wall!
No, he did a concert. When the wall came down, David Hasselhoff, who was an aspiring rock and roll singer, don't get that, but he was, actually had a concert celebrating the fact that the wall came down. Good point right there. I like smart. You're not only smart, so is your audience. This is kind of awesome. So no, we did these. We Blues Brothers. We did an online slot machine using the Blues Brothers images and likeness. Did several of them. Because online slot machine, online gaming in Europe is huge. It's a huge business. Here in the United States, it's illegal, at least right now. It's changing eventually. So all I would do is basically an extension of the licensing business, where I would take very popular images that were kind of consistent with the European audience, and we would hire developers who would then create these slot machines using those images, and then we would distribute them to companies that were in that business. So it wasn't a video game necessarily, but it was gaming, legal gambling.
Licensing of names to those, okay. All right, who's got questions? Let's raise your hands. I'm going to come around with the microphone, and then let's get some questions for Mr. Bischoff from our very smart audience, as appointed by him.
This is a brilliant freaking audience. They're not just smart, they're brilliant.
Starting with you, sir. What is your name? What's your question?
Steve, how did the original inaugurate of Nitro come to be at Mall of America? How did that process to pick that venue come to be?
Great question. God, this is so much fun. Again, if you listen to my podcast, you'll hear me say this too often, I'm sure, but context is king, right? Meaning you got to put yourself back in that period of time to really understand the why of it all. Hold on. WCW prior to Nitro couldn't draw flies if we packed the arena with dog shit, right? It was just, we just weren't that successful as a television property. We couldn't draw an audience. So often, one of the reasons, if you're familiar with WCW's history, one of the reasons that we shot a lot of our television shows at the Disney MGM studios is because you had a built-in audience there. People would literally come in and fill up a soundstage to watch wrestling, not because they wanted to watch WCW, because it was freaking hot outside and humid and it was cool and air conditioned inside the soundstage, and there was stuff going on. So they would come in there and sit there for an hour or two, watch TV, and then go, travel the rest of the park. So when we launched Nitro, we knew that we had to create an energy, a buzz, an image, a perception, but we also knew that we couldn't draw a crowd. Our ability to do so was very limited. So much like the logic behind going to a soundstage, I thought, well, this is the biggest mall in America. I used to live in Minneapolis, so I was very familiar with the kind of buzz around the Mall of America. I knew that there were people from all over the world that were coming there every day just to see the biggest mall in America. So I thought, what a better place to have a wrestling event. It's never been done before. I knew it would draw a crowd, even though it wasn't a paying crowd. There were no tickets being sold for it. From a television point of view, it would look like a real event. It would look like something significant and important because it was taking place in the largest mall in the world that was being celebrated at the time as such. And it would draw a crowd, and I wouldn't have to worry about whether or not people showed up. Because the crowd really is almost as important, if not more important, than what's going on in the ring. If you can imagine, how many of you watched WrestleMania this year? By the way, that's where I got the flu. Half the people that I know that were at WrestleMania over that weekend sound just like me right now. But if you take as big as that event was, the main event match, for example, as big as that was, as exciting as that was, if you would have taken those three women and put them in a venue with a crowd about this size, everybody sitting at home would go, I don't see any kids here, do I? No, I don't. Everybody would have gone, what the fuck did I pay $49.95 for this for? Doesn't make any sense. I'm an idiot. I spent $50 to watch an event that less than 75 people showed up for. Damn, it would not have the same energy. The flip side of that is you could put two people that no one knows, have to beat the hell out of each other with a metal chair in front of 80,000 people in a big arena that are just cheering because they're bored. And you would go, wow, these people are stars. So the crowd is very important, and that's why we went there. Sorry, long story. I go in the weeds. I just love going in the weeds.
Quick follow-up. Was it a hard sell to Mall of America to get the show there?
No, they kind of bent over backwards for us because, again, keep in mind, we were Turner Television and TNT Network. So for them, having a live television program coming from their Mall of America, while they were still trying to create awareness and brand themselves, was a huge opportunity. Today, they would have to pay for that. If they were to go to WWE and say, look, we want you to shoot a Monday Night Raw in our atrium, the Mall of America would have to stroke a check for somewhere probably between $5 and $8 million.
I'm still hoping that Hulk Hogan's Pasta Mania is still there.
It didn't last long, brother. Which is kind of an interesting question. How do you fuck up pasta?
Add mania to it, brother.
It's pasta, for crying out loud.
What you gonna do when rigatoni comes after you?
Everybody loves it. It doesn't cost anything.
Alright, what's your question?
I'm Joe, and how you fuck up the pasta when you're just messing around with old such and such. Yeah, whatever. All right, I got something for Eric. I love your podcast. It's great. You're awesome. You're amazing. I got no kids, right? A fuck, marry, kill. Conrad Thompson, Jim Cornette, Dave Meltzer.
Jeez, my gosh.
I'd have to get my Uzi and just wipe all three of them out.
I think that's a fair answer.
There is no good answer to that. And then I turn it on myself for having to even contemplate such a question. Now I'd go to you first. I'd do you, then I'd shoot myself.
I think that's your answer. What's your name? What's your question?
My name is Bob. My question is, was there anybody on the roster who refused to be in the game because they weren't getting any money or something like that? Were they like, no, I'm not getting any money from this, I'm not going to be in the game?
No.
Because you probably fired them.
Well, I would have not had any choice, number one, and I would have had to fire them. But nobody, keep in mind, a lot of these guys are making, at the high end of the spectrum, this is back in the, mid-90s, making $1 million a year. So they weren't too worried about what percentage of revenue they were getting from video games.
Next question. What's your name? What's your question?
My name is Josh. I have a question that kind of spins off something you talked about on 83 Weeks, where, if I'm remembering correctly, the intention at one point was to make Nitro an NWO show, Thunder a WCW show. I see all the video games up there all co-branded. Was there any point at which you thought, well, maybe the NWO is big enough to get its own game? Was that something that was considered?
Not by me. It would have been considered probably, or most likely, by whoever our licensee was. They may have felt that way, but once we entered into a licensing agreement with whoever it was, THQ or EA Sports or anybody else, that would have been all of the creative, because that would have fallen under creative and creative strategy. That would have been up to the licensee, not up to us.
Were there any wrestlers that lobbied to be on the cover of the video games?
Not lobbied, but sorry?
Well, it just looks like Hulk Hogan, had to.
Well, no, but he didn't lobby for it. And again, you have to understand the dynamics of the agreements. Hulk Hogan, by the way, was one of the most successful brands in WCW during that time. And I know people have, when you look at wrestling, everybody's got opinions about talent and who deserved what and who was the most important and who should have got a bigger push and who Eric should have never fired or whatever. But for the licensees, because again, that's what you see up there, all of those decisions, creative decisions that you see in front of you, were not decisions that we had anything to do with. That was the licensee. When EA Sports said, okay, we want to buy a WCW license, that means they had access and could use any and all of our talent creatively any way they wanted to. We didn't tell them how they should market their games. We didn't tell them who should be on the cover. We didn't even suggest it. In fact, we didn't get a vote, period. Now, they may have come to us and said, okay, we're going to enter into a deal today. Okay, today is what, April 12th, 13th, whatever it is, of 2019. That game probably wouldn't come out for a year. It takes that long. Between the time you sign a deal and the time the product is actually created, designed, ready to ship into stores, that's about a 12-month or 18-month process. So a licensee may come to us and say, who would you project is going to be front and center in your company 18 months from now? They would come to us and ask us that. But whoever they put on the front of those covers was really up to them.
What's your name? What's your question?
My name's Joe. I have a question about the revenue share model you talked about. So I'm just curious which you thought worked better. I mean, it sounds like in WCW you essentially had like a salary model, and in WWE, WWF, they had a revenue share model. Which one do you think ultimately, in hindsight, worked out better?
Well,
Which one would you replicate now?
It's not even hindsight. You know, I knew then that the revenue share model was a much safer model from a business perspective, because your talent costs weren't a fixed cost. Meaning, as your business went up, you were able to share that revenue. Yes, the talent made more money, but on a percentage of revenue, it was consistent to what it may have been 2 or 3 years previous to that, when the business may have been down. So your talent wasn't so much of a fixed cost. We just didn't have the luxury. I couldn't, when somebody came to WCW, I couldn't say, look, I'm gonna give you 20% of all of the, and by the way, when you're in WC or WWF today, if you get like 2% or 3%, that's a big number if you're a high-end talent. But let's just say, given that, somebody would have come to me and I really wanted them, and I said, I'm gonna give you 20%, WWF only gives you 2%. I'm gonna give you 20%. Now, unless that person was completely freaking ignorant or didn't have an attorney, and by the way, when you're dealing with high-profile talent, neither is the case, they would have said, great, that's a hell of a deal. Show me what kind of licensing revenue you've done over the last 24 months so I can get an idea what that means. And I would have said, well, we haven't, we don't have any. I'm really offering you 20% of nothing. And that would have been the end of that conversation. So even though we knew that the rev share model was a better model, we didn't have the luxury of discussing it because we didn't have the revenue to share.
Name the question.
My name is Mike, and today we live in a gaming age where HD remakes are real popular. We talk about licenses and how WWE Network works, and it's separate from all that. We know that they own the video archive of WCW, but for a license for something like WCW NWO Revenge for N64, does that license exist? Could somebody purchase that, and then would they get all of the wrestlers in that license, or is because that's how the contract would have worked with WCW? So.
If I understand your question correctly, so if you decided after winning the Powerball lottery, which I think was about 92 million last time I checked this morning, but if you were to come across a bunch of money and decide, you know what, I want to revive that game. It's a retro cool game. I want to acquire that license and repurpose that brand. You would have to negotiate with the WWE because they acquired all of those licenses and the rights underneath those licenses. They acquired that from WCW. So that's where you go. Good luck on that, by the way. Tell Vince I said hi.
Yeah, the other part of that is the actual code too. So I believe in this situation, THQ, unless WWE bought that, so then that ownership would have gone somewhere. It's either, it would be very convoluted. This happens with a lot of retro video games where people want to revive them, like GoldenEye is a big example, right? Everyone wants GoldenEye back, but there's multiple pieces, like the Bond license, and then the code license, and then the game itself. Like there's multiple pieces in play, that it's not just one license that you're buying, it's a bunch of different things. So
yeah, you would literally have to recode the game. You'd have to start from, you could use the imagery, you could use the talent, but you couldn't repurpose the game as it was back then.
Name and question?
My name is Jeff, and my question, I'm going to hopefully articulate this properly, but my brother and I used to play WCW versus the World, and it was a game that, it was originally Japanese, but then I guess it got acquired by THQ and everything, but they kept a lot of the wrestlers from the Japanese game in the game with your guys. So my question, because this kind of came up when you were talking about how nobody got any money from licensing or anything for their likenesses. All those characters that were from the Japanese games were all renamed to like Great Sasuke was called like Black Ninja, or like Antonio Inoki's like called something else. And so with that in mind, I mean, wouldn't there have been like whose call would it have been to just rename them if they could have kept the names if no one was getting money from that?
Good question.
Great question. That would have been the licensee's decision. They would have acquired from us the names, likenesses, images of whatever talent was associated with our company at that time. Because when we paid that talent, those were the rights that we paid for. So once we paid them for those rights, we could do whatever we wanted to do with those images and names and likenesses, just like WWE can today. If they wanted to come out with a video game using my name and likeness from the period of time when I was there and rename me, Betty Boop, they could do that. I wouldn't have a voice in that, as long as they were using my image from that period of time. So that was, if I understand your question correctly, that was the situation back then. WCW, owned those names and likenesses and images. We transferred them by way of license to a developer, and then from a creative point of view, or marketing point of view, they renamed them in a way that they thought was most compelling for their market. You don't like that answer? You're shaking your head. You want to get up here and arm wrestle over it? What the fuck?
You were the biggest heel I know, like growing up and everything, and I'd say that probably must have did a great job because growing up I used to hate.
I think he kind of still does, Eric. I feel a little contempt in this room all of a sudden.
Now I realize, like, if you were able to do that to me, obviously you did a great job. Thanks.
Thank you for saying that.
Name a question.
That actually kind of interesting ties into my question. Last year you were on WWE Network's Table of Three, and they're pitting you as the heel of that little dinner, I guess. How did that feel?
Who was I doing? Was that the one when I was with
Cornette Hayes.
Michael Hayes? They were trying to make me a heel, but Cornette made such an ass of himself that I ended up coming off as a babyface. It felt good for a change. I thought, wow, this is kind of fun. Now I know why Hulk Hogan loves it so much.
Not to go full Conrad here, but we all know Bruce Pritchard has a Jim Cornette impression. Do you have one also?
Unless somebody steps on my nuts, I can't possibly squeak that high.
Name and question.
My name is Scott, and my question is kind of related to the licensing and who decides who's in the game. Do you know why WCW NWO Revenge, which would have been released in October of '98, did not have Ric Flair in it? Was he not under contract for that?
He was under contract. Really, really good question. Conrad would be jealous of you. At the time that deal went down, Ric Flair and WCW were in a very contentious litigation, and we weren't sure that he was even going to be a part of WCW at that time. So we recommended strongly that he not be a part of the game.
Name and question.
My name is Matt. If you don't want to answer, that's fine. I just want to clear some backstage gossip up. Macho Man, Stephanie McMahon.
Come on.
You know what I'm saying?
I wasn't there, so clearly I can't give you my perspective on something that may or may not have occurred when I wasn't there. Dave Meltzer would. He reported as fact, but I won't go there. By the way, did anybody here see the Randy Savage special on Vice TV? You didn't see that? Really good. What was it called? The Dark Side of Wrestling? Or
True Ring Stories or something like that? Dark Side of the Ring.
Yeah, I would encourage you to, look it up. And I only say that because I love Randy. He was a really, really special guy. I miss him badly. And they did a really great job. So when you get home next week, check it out. You'll be glad you did. You can thank me later.
Those other questions. Please know backstage. We don't need to know anything about Batista, okay? Leave those questions at home, please. Yes, sir. What's your name? What's your question?
Hi, my name is Justin. So you talked about how when you were starting up WCW, you had your big show in the Mall of America. So now, in your new, basically fledgling company, even though some of the people you were bringing in were already established stars with other federations and territories. Now, 20-something odd years later, you now have a new Fezman company coming up with superstars who are somewhat established, not quite as established, with AEW, with the revenue sharing as it is and the video game world as it is. Would you suggest that they jump into the video game world right away, right off the bat, or do the same thing you guys did and wait a few years to get themselves established as a brand first?
This is collectively the smartest group of people I've been around in a long time. No matter what they say about gamers being nerds, it's not true. You guys are smart fuckers. Again, the real question is, what does the licensee want? You know, if and I don't even know who the big, video game companies are anymore, so I'm not going to try to sound like I know something I don't. But if there's a big video game company out there that's interested in wrestling, it's really their risk. Do they want to take a chance on something that's a startup like AEW before it even has a television show? They don't have a brand. You guys may know of it, and they've created a great buzz because of social media, the internet, YouTube, and all that, which is really amazing to me. I'm fascinated by it all. But it's not really a tactical question or a strategic question that AEW has to ask or answer. It's really a question that a potential licensee has to ask or answer. Does that make sense to you? Now, let's do a hypothetical, even though I hate fucking hypotheticals. But if we're gonna do a hypothetical, if I'm running AEW and someone comes to me and says, okay, here's $5 million for a license. We want to do all your video games. I may say, you know what? I'm gonna bet on myself and I'm gonna pass. Even though $5 million is nice, I'm gonna pass on that because I think my brand will be worth more 3 years from now than it is right now. And I would rather have the ability to enter into a deal when I'm hot than enter into a deal when I'm starting up. And that's a question you'd have to ask yourself, or they would have to ask themselves. But it's really driven more by the licensee than the licensor. Licensor being AEW in this case.
One last question, Mr. Chairman.
Last question. No, I'm having fun.
You having fun? Name a question. My name is Josh, and you kind of just brought up what I was going to ask about is chances of AEW coming in because they're kind of brand new competitive. They're also offering, from what you can see in articles, offering competitive salaries to wrestlers, and also they're in talks with Turner Sports, supposedly getting a deal with TNT, or at least in talks. What do you think their chances are, going against WWE and offering all these large salaries to wrestlers?
It's really interesting. First of all, I want to make it really abundantly clear. I'm so excited for AEW, even though I really don't. I mean, Cody Rhodes, I've known Cody since he was this tall. I was very close friends with his father, and his brother. But, Cody, who I know and I've had contact with, I talked to him, on the phone about a year or so ago, before all this came up. I'm nothing but love and support for them and wish them nothing but great success. That being said, a couple things I find really interesting. The narrative, those of you that, understand what I mean by narrative in the dirt sheet universe and all that, if you talk to Dave Meltzer, for example, he'll tell you one of the biggest mistakes Eric Bischoff ever made is writing those big multi-million-dollar contracts. Paying these guys, way more money than they're worth, blah, 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 blah. Guess what AEW's doing right now? Right? Now, they're doing it for the same reason I had to do it. Because if you want to get in the game and you want big-name players in your game, this game being professional wrestling in general, not video games. But if you want to attract the top of the line talent, you're going to have to write a check, or you're not going to have them because they know what they're worth. So AEW right now is following, in some respects, in the same footsteps that I was back in '94, '95. So I find that really interesting. I don't know. In terms, it's funny you said, they're in conversations with Turner Sports. I got news for you. Turner Sports is being unraveled as we speak. AT&T, I work for Ted Turner and Turner Broadcasting. Time Warner came along and acquired Turner Broadcasting. AOL came along and acquired Turner Broadcasting and Time Warner. Now AT&T is coming along, and they're acquiring that. It's like big fish eating little fish all friggin' day long. And by the way, the Turner name is going to disappear. It's not going to be Turner Classic Movies. All that's going away. Ted Turner's name is coming off the brand completely. And Turner Sports, who, if we believe what we read, and I believe about most of it, Turner Sports is going away. They're eliminating that division. So I don't know what that deal is going to look like. I hope that it happens. I pray that AEW gets a really lucrative television deal that would allow them to have a high enough profile that they could be considered a legitimate player in the industry. I don't think they'll ever be a competitor to the WWE. It's not possible anymore. WWE is too big. It's just not possible. But you don't have to be competitive with the WWE in order to be successful. It doesn't have to be a binary kind of thing. It can be both. WWE can be hugely successful, and you can be hugely successful and not have any impact at all on WWE's business.
Last thing we're going to do, Eric, we're going to have you come around, if you don't mind. The last thing before we whisk you away, the staff whisks you away. We're going to take a giant group picture so we can post it on social. So feel free to get up, and then let's get a little cozy behind us. Eric, if you want to come around here.
I was going to say, how are we going to fit them all up here?
We're going to come down here, and we're going to take a giant group photo.
Mind if I
for the socials? I think Eric will want to hold that for the photo, I'm certain.
You hold it. You stand right next to me.
Yeah. Come over there, and then, you stand on that side over there. Yeah, do that. That's fine.
Everybody wave. 1, 2, 3, wave.
All right, big round of applause for Eric Bischoff. That was a very informative panel.
And there you go. There's another informative and entertaining panel from the 2019 Midwest Gaming Classic. I'd like to thank both Arda O'Kell, the guest host, and the star of the show, Eric Bischoff, for being at that panel, which was very fun and informative. And I'd like to give my hats off to Eric Bischoff for creating a 83-week run of WCW Nitro being on the top of the ratings. He did a great job. He knew what he was doing. And I don't care what anybody else has to say, because it was very, very entertaining television. And actually, to tell you the truth, it was very entertaining television between WWF and WCW. I would go back and forth, or I would record one and watch the other so that I would never miss a match. And we all know that eventually WCW went under and the WWF took over. And I guess that's just how things go. I have one more reminder for you to check out the Midwest Gaming Classic website. Just go over to MidwestGamingClassic.com, scroll to the middle of the page, and then click on the Learn icon. Once you click on that Learn icon, it will take you to the panel and presentation page, where it will be updated daily and hopefully by the end of the week. If it is not, it's because we are waiting on presenters to give us certain information on when they will be available and really what they will be presenting to you, our guests. So I know this is getting a little long in the tooth, and we are 4 weeks out from the show, but unfortunately, sometimes this is how things go when you are dealing with a big show like this, and there are lots of things coming in, and you gotta juggle them around and figure out where they fit in. So thank you very much for understanding and for your patience. And until next time, thank you very much for watching. I greatly appreciate it. Take care, stay safe, and game on.
Join us for the official opening ceremonies. This is the Midwest Gaming Classic Showcase. Hear from industry professionals, game creators, and more. You'll also get an insight on what's happening all weekend long at the show. Hosted by Matt Isbell and Adam Millich with a special opening performance by Brian Koenig. You don't want to miss the Midwest Gaming Classic Showcase, happening Friday, April 5th on the American Pinball Main Stage at 5 p.m. Central Time.